Welcome to Things You Don't Know. This is a very special podcast where we have a guest today who we're looking forward to doing many different things with. But this is Mr. Patrick Ryan, who has some very interesting perspectives to add to us. It's really also a focus on a subject that Dr. Deneen and myself feel is very important and has not been properly explored. And when it has been explored, the information has mostly been quite skewed. This very important topic concerns people with disabilities, or as I like to say, varying exceptionalities, as I prefer to call them. And I'll explain why I do that a little later. It is our pleasure right now to have with us Patrick Ryan, who's a young man who not only has overcome many issues, but recently gave a TEDx talk.
It's been my privilege to know and work with Patrick for 4 years. I met him in the Theater for Everyone program, which was a joint project, the Paper Mill Playhouse, and my dear friend and mentor, Leslie Finelli's Theater in Motion program. He's a very smart, dedicated leader. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi, I am Patrick Ryan. I am 17 years old and just started my senior year in high school. I am happy to be here today to help Sean and Dr. Weaver spread awareness and acceptance for people with disabilities. I first joined the Theater for Everyone group in January of 2019. The theater group is a very fun group that I would recommend to anyone. We chat and do fun improv activities. It was especially helpful during COVID because it gave me something to look forward to and an opportunity to socialize. I also feel like the group helped me gain some confidence to speak in public during my TED Talk.
Well, yes, and you did a wonderful job with that too. And I would recommend people to take a look at that. Patrick, could you tell people how to find that real quick?
You can go onto YouTube and type in Patrick Ryan leveling the playing field TED Talk.
Okay, super. Okay, so when did you or your parents notice that things were different for you?
My parents noticed things were different when I was around 2 years old. They noticed that I had sensory issues and I really wasn't interested in my peers or pretend play. I started talking at 7 months old, believe it or not. I knew my letters, numbers, shapes, and colors all before I was 18 months old. My parents knew I was bright, but I was also a little quirky. For example, I was obsessed with the presidents, and still am today, and knew all of them at age 2. People couldn't get over that when I was 2. I would walk around and say Barack Obama was going to win the 2008 election.
That's great. Um, just to review for our audience, although ASD shows differently for different people, some of the signs of ASD are difficulty making friends, difficulty with communication, difficulty empathizing, difficulty making appropriate eye contact, social awkwardness, narrowed interests, difficulty with change, especially changes in routine, literal interpretations, particularly I'm talking about the spoken or written word, mainly the spoken, excellence in pattern recognition, and often with math. Some have difficulty with motor skills, repetitive motion, such as finger or hand movements, may have some trouble understanding social cues, and have some heightened sensitivity to light, noise, texture, color, taste, and some personal space issues also.
It really is a lot to deal with. And may I say, you've overcome a lot of these issues very well. How did you manage so effectively to deal with these things?
I got some help and counseling with a wonderful therapist named Alex Gitter. She taught me how to deal with anxiety. Basically, she gave me the tools to deal with my worries. My parents always kept me involved with many different activities and made sure I had the support I needed. My mom always says I'm a therapist's dream because I really want to be the best version of myself.
What difficulties, if I may ask, did you have when you started going to school, and how did you deal with those issues?
I had lots of behavioral issues in school when I was much younger, especially with schedule changes and hard work. Again, it was hard for me to connect with my peers. Most of my academic skills were strong, but I struggled with pragmatic skills, like the practical things,
And what do you mean by practical things?
like basically things that you'd normally have in common with your peers.
In other words, you're talking mainly about social sorts of things. And
Yes.
okay, great, great. It was probably difficult for you when you started school, as you were suddenly thrust into a group with kids you didn't know, and you may have struggled to fit in socially. You probably had some difficulties understanding subtle social cues, etc., and wondering why they weren't interested precisely in the same things that you were. Or perhaps that wasn't an issue for you.
I know in my younger days, I also had some problems with those issues, so I can relate.
Other students didn't understand me, so I ended up really relating to adults rather than kids. In middle school, I sat alone at lunch for 1.5 years until I got the confidence and the tools to ask others if I could sit with them. I really think the school could have done a better job at facilitating connections. I don't think anyone should ever sit alone. Sitting alone at first didn't really bother me because I didn't realize it would be more fun sitting with other people. Alex, my therapist, helped me a lot with role playing and conversation skills.
I know you mentioned in your TED Talk, which we'll go over in a little more detail later, that you use sports to help you with socialization. I know being involved in our theater group was a help with that too. Do you think this is because of the emphasis on the concept of a team, or do you feel your perception, whether of other players in sports or other actors in our group, helped you out also? And were there other things that you engaged that helped in overcoming some of these issues?
I think sports helped me because it gave me things in common with other people. Being part of a team gave me a natural way to interact with my peers. Being a sports fan gives me something fun to talk about with other people. Let's face it, most kids don't want to talk about politics or the presidents, but they do like talking about professional sports.
Wow. Yes, you've done a masterful job dealing with many issues. I'm wondering if you have plans for further education, college or whatever, and what areas you might want to focus on.
After I graduate in June of 2024, I will be in the school district's 18 to 21 program, while I'll also potentially take some college level classes and/or get a part-time job. I think it will be important to get some job sampling experience to see what I want to do for a career.
You've mentioned to me that you're interested in music. And as you may know, I have degrees in music, taught music, and really enjoy music myself and many different kinds of music. If our listeners want to check out, we've done a podcast on the Jongleurs and also on Woodstock, which I was at. I don't know, Patrick, if you've ever heard of Woodstock, but it was considered and still is considered to be the pinnacle of music concerts. It was a 3 or 4 day affair. Anyhow, do you only listen to one type of music, or have you explored many musical genres?
I like listening to a few different types of music, mostly rock music. I can recognize classical music from Theater for Everyone. I enjoy going to concerts like Billy Joel. One of my favorite bands is the Beatles. They have good music, and I like how they inspired people from all over the world.
One of the things that I know happens to anyone who differs from the normative, often unintentionally put up barriers in a misguided attempt to make things easier, quote unquote, for people. I'm thinking about the entire range of what is often called disability. For example, assuming that someone with a movement disability or a person with Down syndrome or a person with ASD cannot do certain things, which I think is just ridiculous. It's a complete misunderstanding. People can do many things, whether you think so or not. It's up to them. Have you faced these kinds of roadblocks and how do you deal with them?
Well, I know that as a person with cerebral palsy, in my own way, I've faced difficulties when people assumed I was just not able to do things, and because of that, thought I was less than. It could be something very complicated, from getting a doctorate and becoming a professor, to something very simple like how to put on a pair of socks. I must say, when I was able to show I could do these things, it felt out of this world good. Like you, Patrick, I put my mind on the things I can do rather than focusing on what I could not. And I'm sure you know what that feels like. So I'm curious, just as Dr. Weaver is, how did you deal with those issues?
Many people didn't think I could participate in mainstream activities. Often, it was easier to just put me in an isolated setting. My parents advocated for that not to happen and insisted I could be in general education classes. I am very happy my parents advocated for me and that I am in general education classes. I think it is important because I am not several grade levels behind anyone. Everyone should be given a chance to develop strengths.
I couldn't agree more. I know that last year you were with a group that got minors selected to give a TED Talk. I'm curious, did you join that group because you wanted to do a TED Talk? And why do you think they selected you?
It is kind of a funny story and a good one to remember. Initially, I was supposed to take a cooking class in my school, but it couldn't fit in my schedule. I'm not sure if anyone really thought that talking the talk, effective presentation skills was a great fit for me. I was not in love with the class at first and thought I wasn't good at writing or storytelling. As it turns out, I was great at both and loved the class. I was encouraged to audition for the annual TEDx Youth event in Chatham at the end of the school year. I was so proud of myself when I got selected. I had to submit a drafted script to the TED organization in order to be considered. I think I was selected to speak last because, apparently, my message was so impactful. I hope people will continue to watch my TED Talk so my message of inclusion can be shared. The whole experience was also a good reminder to me that sometimes when plans change, the outcome can actually be better than it would have been.
That's something I think we all need to remember.
Patrick, you mentioned that understanding that change can be a positive thing. I know I've talked with Sean a great deal about change from time to time, and I know that it's difficult for many people. I think one of the things that I see that has affected Sean, affects me, affects everyone, is that when change is imposed on you, that's tough. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit. It feels threatening. It feels like if I make this change that somebody else tells me I need to make, that it almost is like losing a piece of yourself. Have you felt that kind of thing before?
Kind of, I have, but I feel like I've gotten better at handling the unexpected changes because I used to react to them in terrible ways. I used to get all short-tempered and upset about a change, but it didn't really, but when I learned that I wasn't taking the cooking class, I was okay and excited to see what it would be like.
Really?
I was actually okay when I learned that I wasn't taking the cooking class.
Actually, that's very remarkable. Sean, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, first, may I say that In a way, Patrick, you've been an example to me. As you were saying, Dr. Weaver, changes that are imposed from the outside can really seem like one more disappointment or someone else trying to control your life. And I've spent a lot of effort and time to direct my own life. So it's good to see someone like you, both of you have been examples to me and encouraging me to find changes that I could accept and realize that it doesn't necessarily have to be a disaster. It could be something really wonderful. I think the best example is, as you know, Dr. Weaver, I don't know if I ever told you this, Patrick, but originally I wanted to teach high school. And when I was an undergrad going for my bachelor's, I was taking education courses and that didn't work out. So initially I thought, oh Lord, what am I going to do now? I've been working on this thing for years. It's not going to go anywhere. But I came upon the idea of being a college instructor. And after a while, I really liked that. And I have to say, I almost don't think I could go back to my other idea now. It's been inculcated in an important part of my life for decades now. So there's an example of a positive change.
Mm-hmm. And, Patrick, I just think it's wonderful that you were able to so smoothly transition to make that change. And, I think it speaks highly of you.
It certainly does. I know when Leslie retired with the theater group, it was difficult for all of us to see her go. But Molly and now Mary Guzmande have done a wonderful job. Their style is a little different, but we're basically doing similar and often the same stuff. And it's been a very positive experience for everybody, I think.
Patrick, as a member of that group, what did you get out of it? You've said that it was good for you and important, but how so? Why? I mean, what did they do for you?
I feel like I got quite a bit out of it. I got to meet some new people who are all great, and it also is something that really helps me. That's really helped me get and speak to a lot of people in like public.
Hmm.
It's something that's really helped me. It's a great group that I'd highly recommend.
Really? And what, how were you able to kind of get that into yourself, assimilate it, as it were?
I don't know how I was able to get like that stuff into myself, but I know that I was able to and able to like be the best person I can be. Like
Mhm.
like it can make me and I really enjoy that group a lot and the people are great.
Okay. Did that translate to like your schoolwork and that sort of thing?
I don't know if it did that, but it definitely translated to me doing the TED Talk for sure, but I don't know if it translated to the schoolwork or anything.
Well, don't you have to sometimes say something in front of the class? And did your experience with doing this make it easier for you to do that?
I think it's made it easier for me to do it. Although I've said things in front of classes before that, but this made it easier.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
If I may, one thing that I noticed, Patrick, is you're very good at helping other people. I remember when we had our friend Lucy, who communicates only with an augmentative, and you really helped her figure out the story plots and enable her to be a valued part of the group.
Sean, could you explain to our listeners what an augmentative is?
Yes, an augmentative is a device people use to communicate who don't have either the physical strength in their vocal cords or the ability to communicate through oral speech. The most classic example is the late Professor Stephen Hawking. You can type on them, and it can be anything from "Could I please have some lime coke" to a detailed scientific address. And some of the young people in our group use those devices to communicate with.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I think, Patrick, that one of the things that kind of kept you going was what Dr. Deneen mentioned about being good at helping other people.
Yeah, I also feel like I'm also really good at that.
Hmm. Well, obviously, I mean, you've done a lot of things to the extent that they call you the mayor at school. How did that happen?
I think they did that based on the fact that I know a lot of people and know who a lot of people are, and everyone know it. Like they all know me because I take the time to get to know people that I don't really have much to do with. I take the time.
Wow. Okay, just to sort of chart, reiterate, for a long time you sort of had a self-imposed isolation. You stayed to yourself, didn't mess around with your peers. It was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And now this is a complete 180. You do realize that.
Yes, and like what I think I'm still kind of the same person as I once was, but I've changed. But I'm never going to be no one. Sometimes people say that their child is a different person after they get help. That's actually not true. You're never 100% a different person.
Good point. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah, it really is. Okay. Listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us and sharing with our listeners. I'm hoping that our listeners can take something very important away from this podcast, and that is that do not allow people to tell you what your limits are. They don't know. They don't know, and you do.
I will continue to not allow that. Like people have thought that I had limits, but you need the opportunities to grow. Some people think you can't grow.
Mhm.
Like people years ago definitely thought that I couldn't grow, that it was never going to happen for me.
Well, you've disproved that ever since I've known you. You are light years ahead of the way you were in the beginning of all this.
And I do know that there are also some more good things to come too.
I'm sure.
Like I have a lot on my way.
Hmm. And you made that happen. You may have gotten help. Yes, I get it. But in the final analysis, you're the one who determined that that was going to happen and you made it happen. And my hat off to you for that.
Mine too. You made a conscious choice to say, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to do the absolute best I can to go forward and become an even better version of myself.
Yeah, but sometimes people say that they're committed to helping them, but they're not.
Or they're misguided.
There are people that are like that that say that they're committed to helping those with special needs, but they're not.
You're absolutely 100% spot on. I know, having been in the around people that say they want to help, which, I mean, helping is fine, but the fundamental change comes from within the person themselves. So, well, I suppose we should probably stop for today, but I want to tell our listeners the next podcast in this kind of series that we're going to do on what I call varying exceptionalities is we're going to get into some of these other issues. And I am very excited that Patrick accepted going to be a part of that. And then following that podcast, we're going to do another one, which is going to be a panel, which is going to be mainly composed of people who have different types of exceptionalities. And I have to say, I'm excited about that. So, again, I want to thank you, Patrick, and I want to thank our listeners. And hey, while you're thinking about it, give us a like, leave some comments if you want, and subscribe. We have a lot of very interesting topics coming.
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me on your podcast. And Dr. Weaver, it was so nice to meet you.
Oh, the pleasure and the honor of that is all mine. I am so glad to have met you. Absolutely.
I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
You too.